Welcome to Cut Through the Noise. This is Dave Toronto. This program is about people, communication, business, sales, and life. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and share with your friends. Okay, so yesterday I got a text from a buddy who shall remain nameless at 4:33 p.m. and he asked me, when are you going to put out a podcast with the title, This Just Blows? I know it's inappropriate, but I got such a kick out of it. I know I probably shouldn't be giggling because I know we're all going through really uncertain times, and that's really where I wanted to spend today's conversation is though on the topic of uncertainty. In fact, since last Friday, I've tried to record no less than 8 of these conversations, and they've all gotten off track or I've missed the mark around what I want to really say. And it's just a crazy time we're going through, so my thoughts are a little bit jumbled as well. But I keep coming back to the whole idea of uncertainty and how the unknown or the perceived loss of control impacts people. It can really have a negative impact on people if you don't find ways to deal with it. And so I want to talk about ineffective ways to deal with it and then maybe a more effective way to deal with it, but I'm not going to make any assumptions that just because I say these things that all of a sudden it just becomes easy. It isn't easy. And I think about just times in my life where things have felt uncertain. I know we all have those things. We all have those times that things feel uncertain. The 2 major times for me, the first major uncertainty I experienced was on my honeymoon. My wife and we had taken a trip for a few days. We went to Amsterdam, and then the balance of the next couple of weeks, the balance of the trip was spent in Kenya on a safari, and we hit a couple of game reserves, and then we finished on the coast. It was a phenomenal trip, and for anybody who has an interest in an African safari, I recommend it all day long. It's absolutely unbelievable. That said, we did encounter a glitch on the honeymoon, and we had just finished dinner. We were at a game reserve in Masai Mara, which is the area of Kenya where, you can see any animal you want: lions, crocodiles, rhinos. This is the area of the country where every year the 2 million wildebeest go on a migration to cross the Mara River, and it's just spectacular. So we were having dinner there. We had just finished dinner, and the manager of the location, which was called Kichwa Tembo, another unbelievable place, he had come to my wife and I and asked us to talk because he wanted to inform us that there was an issue back home. And up until this point on the honeymoon, we had encountered a number of surprises and gifts. The person who planned the trip made sure that everywhere we went, we were acknowledged in some way, shape, or form because we had just got married. So we just thought, here's another way to surprise us. And what he said was, there's an issue back home. I regret to inform you that a couple of planes had crashed into the White House, or a plane had crashed into the White House. And I didn't know what to make of it, neither did Chrissy. So he asked us to follow him. So we, along with a couple of other Americans that were at the resort, followed him. And we were surrounded by a number of armed guards as we walked through a wooded area, and we came to a building on the site, and it was filled with most of the employees from the resort were in there sitting in silence watching 2 TVs. And each TV had the headline, America Under Attack. Nobody knew what the heck was going on. I had no idea what this meant. I was ignorant about the problems we had around the world at the time. And I just saw a building burning. I watched a plane fly into one building, and that's what I saw. And I turned to the guy next to me, and I asked him, why is this headline on the television? Why America Under Attack? A plane flew into a building. And he said, sir, keep watching. There's a second plane that hits the other building. Watch what happens. And that's when they replayed the second plane coming in. And in that moment, I realized something's very wrong. In that moment, my wife and I knew we weren't coming home anytime soon. And worse, there was nothing we could do about it. And so for the next week, we had to hang out on our honeymoon with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. One, Will we be able to leave when we're supposed to leave? Will we get home safely? Will we get home alive? Is everybody at home okay? It was a really tense time with a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And it wasn't until we landed in Boston on September 18th, heard the eruption of cheers and applause on the plane, cheering on the pilot for landing us safely at home. It was an unbelievable feeling. And in that moment, the uncertainty, at least up until that point, was over, and we were okay. That was the first major thing in my life that felt incredibly uncertain. Other minor things had happened at that point, but that was pretty major. The second two were when two of my kids were born with issues, both absolutely fine and healthy right now. But my oldest son, shortly after he was born, stopped breathing on the second day. Actually, it was that afternoon. That afternoon he was born. I'm misspeaking. It was the next day. I was looking through the window in the maternity unit, and I was watching a nurse take care of him, and then I watched her pick him up, and she was very rough with him, shaking him and slapping him, and I thought it was like strange, but I didn't know any better. And I went back to the room to see my wife. I said, wow, these nurses are really rough with the babies. I didn't know that the babies were this resilient. And then about 2 minutes later, the head nurse came in and wanted to let us know that we had a problem and that our son had stopped breathing. And we were incredibly uncertain in that moment. And then he was rushed into the NICU unit, and he was there for an additional week. And it turned out he had sleep apnea, and he was and he ended up recovering. And we got him home with a couple of small little inconveniences over the next 6 months. He was healthy as a horse. And then a few years later, when my middle guy was born, he was fine. And then my daughter was born a little bit early. And I remember the call I got from my wife. It was 1:30 in the morning. I had just gotten to bed. She was still at the hospital with my daughter. And my boys were sleeping, and the phone rang at 1:30. And as soon as I heard that phone ring, my stomach dropped. I knew something was wrong. And my wife was hysterical. And what she had told me in that moment was that my daughter was having seizures, and they had to rush her to Children's Hospital in Boston. And they weren't sure what was going to happen. And in that moment, the level of uncertainty and anxiety and fear was like through the roof. And there was nothing I could do about it. And then for the next week and a half, my daughter was in the NICU unit, and it turned out that we were able to take her home, and she was okay, and she's fine to this day. So I'm not here to tell you a sob story. I'm here just to say I know what it's like to feel it, and I know there are so many people out there that have experienced much, much worse, much, much more uncertainty and dire outcomes, severe outcomes that thank God I haven't had to deal with. But I will say that what we're going through right now, this whole coronavirus epidemic, this social distancing thing, this shutting down of our country, is creating all sorts of uncertainty for everybody. And how we choose to deal with these times, what we do right now, will determine our success when we come through this time, because we will come through this time. Eventually the cloud will lift, and we will go back to work, and socializing will start happening again. But how we come through this time, what we do during this time, will determine our effectiveness when we come out on the other side. And my wife and I talk every morning about this type of thing. And she said, there's like two types of people. There are those that use this time to buckle down, to become better, to become stronger, to become healthier, smarter, etc. And there are those that are going to use this time and they're going to waste it. And they're going to find reasons to become a victim of the time. And I tend to agree with that. So here's what I would say. I want to focus on unhealthy ways to deal with this and a productive way to deal with this. And I'm not here to judge your choice. All I'm here to do is state some opinions on things I've observed, things I've unfortunately done, things that I've tried to do well, and things that have worked and not worked. But when it comes to stuff like this, uncertainty and unknown and the fear of losing control, you can feel this at any point in life. When the power goes out, for example, remember being in a hurricane down in Virginia, and we lost power. And during that time, we also lost the ability to use water. But up until that point in my life, when we lost power, I thought we lose power for a couple hours and it comes back. Like within 2 hours or 4 hours, it comes back. We had never lost, I don't remember ever losing the ability to drink water up until that point in my life. I don't remember it. So I remember getting up the next day. There were branches all over my front lawn. And I started working outside, and I cleaned up my yard. It was so humid out there. I'm sweating like crazy. And I was out there for hours and hours and hours. And my thought was, I'll come back into the house, the power will be restored, I'll take a shower, and I'll go to the store, and everything will be back to normal. It didn't happen. Power didn't come back on. We couldn't use water. I was disgustingly sweaty, rancid to smell. And the power didn't come back. And I don't know exactly, I don't remember, but it was days of no power and days of no water. And it was awful. And I was dirty and inconvenienced and very uncertain around when things would get back to normal. That's how I think everybody's feeling right now. When are we going to go back to work? When will the stores open? When will this virus stop spreading? When will people stop dying? We don't know. We don't know. How are we going to deal with it? We can't control what we don't know. So here are 3 ways in which, if you're guilty of these things, I'd ask you to take a step back and rethink how you handle this stuff. But one way in which we can overreact to this stuff is to simply do that, overreact. And it can take on so many different shapes and forms of whatever, but you might overreact by becoming violent. You might overreact by becoming extra emotional. You could overreact by panicking, by freezing and crawling into a hole. You could overreact by drinking too much, or turning to drugs, or over-medicating, or becoming ultra-depressed, or ultra-anxious. Those are overreactions. When stuff like this happens, we have a tendency, if we're not thinking clearly, to overreact to the unknown, to overreact because we don't know what's going to happen. I don't know when this is going to be over. I don't know if somebody's going to die. I don't know if I'm going to get sick. I don't know if I'll have a job. Am I going to have enough money? All of those things aren't good for us. If we don't have control over it, and then we allow ourselves to slip into that, we're not doing ourselves or anyone else any good. It's easier said than done. If you don't have a balanced life, and I've talked about balance in previous conversations, but if you haven't done a good job building and creating balance, overreacting is going to be a go-to for many people. Sometimes overreacting is making all of these problems about you. I've read a lot of people out there that normally I would think are relatively clear-minded when it comes to stress, who are really having a tough time with this. And this time is about, they're spending their time dwelling on what they can't control and how they're feeling. And I think we all, to some extent, are inconvenienced and irritated by what's going on, or saddened by what's going on. But overreacting to any of that is not going to help us. It's not going to help anybody around us. And I think we have to consider, is that our go-to? When we are under stress, when things feel uncertain, do we fall prey to our reactions? The second way in which we've got to guard against is to dismiss the problem or dismiss the uncertainty as if it's not real. And we saw this a couple weeks ago with all of the news around the spring breakers, hanging out, partying on the beaches, hanging on the boardwalks, congregating into massive groups on the water. That's ignoring a problem. That's pretending something isn't happening when it is happening. That's, I only see the world through my lens. You heard some of the people say, well, I booked this trip months ago. I wasn't going to blow it off. Or I'm not going to get sick, and if I do get sick, I'll recover. Maybe so. I personally believe that I'd recover. But what that group of people wasn't considering is their impact on other people. It's the kid in class in school who gets the rest of the class in trouble because he or she won't shut up after the teacher says, shut up or you're all punished. There's always that knucklehead who just can't stop himself or herself from just acting on their feelings and deciding to ruin it for everybody else. That's how I felt watching these spring breakers. And it wasn't all the young people. There were plenty of 40-somethings and 50-somethings, 60-somethings doing the same things, hopping on those flights and booking those hotels. And there were plenty of airlines and hotels discounting their rates, encouraging people to travel in the middle of this. This wasn't a young people problem. This was a dumb people problem and a selfish people problem. And pretending uncertainty, especially what we're going through now, pretending that it doesn't apply to you is not a good reaction to it. That's the other thing I'd say we got to guard against. The third thing I would say we got to guard against is using times like this as an excuse to regress as a human being. This particular reaction or response does not apply to the vast majority of people. I'm not implying that, hey, this is how people are. I am saying, though, that there are people that double down on their problems when they face uncertainty or adversity. There are people out there, and we know some of them. We might be related to some of them. We might have them as friends. We might just know them, as we go through life, that they have a mindset of my life sucks. They fundamentally believe that their life was kind of built to encounter problems. And what we're going through now is the next problem, the next version of the story that they can continue to tell about their life sucking, about them not having a job, about them not having money, about why it's not even worth it. Same shit, different day. I knew of a family years ago, good people, but lived with this we just can't catch a break mindset. Life sucks. Life dealt us a bad hand. We don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of food in our house, for example, was one of the things that they said. And that was true. They didn't have a lot of food and they didn't have a lot of advantages. What I found fascinating was the choices they did make when they didn't have money or couldn't pay a bill. The thing they did have all the time was they always had 2 refrigerators full of beer. They always had plenty of cartons of cigarettes. They never were without scratch tickets every single night. But they didn't have enough food and they didn't have enough healthy stuff around the house. They chose not to spend money that they did have on healthy food or water or books. But they got to still tell, anytime something went wrong, they got to double down on the story that life sucks. And this is no time to do that. When we double down on that, we make ourselves less resilient the next time. We also allow the people around us to observe that. And the people that we have the most influence on see that, and they start to believe that's normal. We have more influence over people than we realize. And what I want to talk about is really the best way to handle this stuff, and it's to look at uncertainty and accept it as something that's never going to go away. Life is filled with uncertainty, and it will be forever. Some of that uncertainty is good, and some of it's going to be challenging. But the given is that it's always going to be there. The circumstances are going to change. We have to look at ourselves and say, what? In spite of that, I'm not going to try to control the uncertainty. I couldn't control what was happening to my kids after they were born. I couldn't control what happened in the United States when we were on our honeymoon. And I couldn't control that. I couldn't make sense of it. The only thing I could do was focus on what was in front of me, which was today. That's all we can focus on is today and what we choose to do with our time today. Are we going to fill today with productive thoughts and productive actions? Or are we going to just throw that out the window? And I want to just comment on a couple of things as an aside. The reason I named this podcast, Cut Through the Noise, is because we are bombarded with noise more so than ever before in our history. The news, social media, you name it. We've got noise. We've got people looking for attention. We've got people looking for ratings. Anything in the name of making money or inciting a riot. That's the world we live in right now. And I train and coach people for a living. I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is this. If you want to condition yourself to be successful, or you want to find a way to be confident, or you want to be good at anything, all you have to do is focus on a couple of good habits, and you repeat those habits consistently over time. Good habits repeated consistently on a daily basis over time turn into permanent habits. They turn into conditioning. They turn into strength. They build character. They build confidence. That's what it does. So if you want to be great at sales or making phone calls, then you pick up the phone every single day until you no longer fear the phone. If you want to be comfortable standing up in front of an audience like I have to do for a living, you know what it takes? It takes getting up over and over again and standing in front of an audience until it's no longer uncomfortable. The unknown is no longer scary. The phone is no longer scary. If you want to be good at having difficult conversations with people, then the willingness to actually broach a difficult conversation over and over again makes you less uncomfortable to focus on the unknown. It's no longer unknown. You can overcome it. I say that because the same holds true for negative messaging and negative choices. Like it or not, there is an enormous amount of negative messaging out there. If you turn on your TV, you turn on social media, you listen to certain friends or family or whatever, there's an undercurrent of negativity that's in our faces all the time. And if you have the ability to shut it off or to focus on something else, that's good. But if you don't, you might buy into it. The same strategy works with negative as it does for positive. It's like marketing. When you focus on and you repeat a certain message over and over again to a person or to the general public, that message starts to become normal. If you start to behave negatively or observe negative behavior repeatedly over time, even negative behavior starts to occur as normal. And then if we're not careful, we'll internalize it. Once something becomes normal, but it's negative, that's when things get dangerous. That's where we really have to watch out for what we're choosing to put in our minds, what we're choosing to listen to, or what we're choosing to believe. What we do right now is so critical. We've got an interesting month ahead of us. And in the end, it's only a month. We've gone through this situation for about 2 weeks. It's a blip on the radar screen. If it goes another month or two, it's still a blip on the radar screen. Don't squander this time. Don't squander it listening to people trying to get you upset. Don't squander it listening to media outlets blame the other media outlet for being unethical. Don't squander it listening to politicians point fingers at who cares the least or who cares the most or who's incompetent. Don't squander it listening to that shit. It's so not worth it. Spend your time educating yourself. Spend your time reading and learning. Spend your time taking care of yourself. Do something productive every single day so that you can build resilience. Don't waste your time and your energy and your head focusing on the wrong things. It's never going to pay off. It's never going to pay off. Even the smartest, healthiest, well-educated person is susceptible to going down the wrong path and succumbing to some of this negativity if they allow too much of it to enter into their heads. I've seen people post on social media about how tough it is to get through this time. I hope some of those people are taking the time to work on themselves and they're not just perpetuating, this is tough for me, by the way, I'm not going to do anything about it. Now's the time to do something about it. Now's the time to look in the mirror and take responsibility for what you listen to, what you're paying attention to, what you're doing, what you're not doing, who you're choosing to communicate with, who you're not communicating with. Use this time to become stronger. Use this time to come out of this situation as a more productive, more prepared, more aware human being. Be cautious of overreacting. Catch yourself if you're overreacting. Catch yourself if you're looking for an excuse to continue a lifetime of problems. Catch yourself if you're ignoring this and downplay it. Really take a hard look in the mirror. How are you responding to this? The best way to respond, and in my opinion, the only way to respond, is one day at a time. It's like a great coach always says, or a great athlete always says, it's one play at a time or one game at a time. That's what life is. It's one day at a time, one decision at a time, one good decision at a time, repeated consistently over the course of time, creates a great life. One bad decision at a time, repeated consistently over time, creates a really difficult life. Right now, we're going through a challenging time. Right now, we're facing a fair amount of uncertainty. We will get through this. 100%, we will get through this. The vast majority of us will. But are we going to come through it as a stronger person, or are we going to come through it as a weaker person? That's the challenge for all of us. That's really what we got to ask ourselves. What are we doing right now to position ourselves for a better future? Uncertainty is here to stay. We just have to position ourselves to respond effectively to it. So now's your chance. Thanks again for listening. For more information on our services, check us out online at jcegrp.com. And feel free to follow me, Dave Toronto, on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter.